In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
Hello, Sublation Media viewers and readers and listeners. This is the first year anniversary of Sublation Magazine. Oh, by the way, I should change the background. I didn't even notice that I have the wrong background up. Let's make it look more snazzy. Here we go. Boom, Sublation Media. And we are celebrating Sublation Magazine today. We're celebrating the struggles of labor. It's May 1st, which around most of the world is a holiday. Here in the United States, where the holiday originated, we don't celebrate it unless you're an anarchist or some other weirdo lefty, in which case you celebrate it by, I think, smashing windows at Starbucks or parading around. In any case, welcome. Click the buttons. That would be the like button, the subscribe button, the Patreon button, your belly button. And yeah, I'm Douglas Lain.
And I'm Ashley Frawley, trying very hard not to complain about the fact that my camera doesn't work and I have to use my crappy laptop camera. I'm so mad. Anyway.
Ashley, there's a phrase, okay? Here it is. You ready for it? Show must go on. So, all right. So, yeah, we're going to be talking about, let's see, someone saying they're still waiting for the Finkelstein book. So we'll get it to you. There's been a glitch in the, someone's saying I shouldn't put this up on the screen, but anyway, the Finkelstein book and the going to Canada sometimes had trouble. I'll reach out to you. So yeah, we are.
I must say it's one of our first books. Is it not our first book? It is our first book, isn't it? No, it's not our first.
Oh, that's the other thing I should announce. The audiobook version of Todd McGowan's Enjoyment Right and Left, which was the first book we published,
I knew
is
that
coming today. And we are I'm this close to finishing the final edit on the audio, and I'll be releasing it through the website and announcing that. So we'll get to we'll announce that on Twitter. I'm actually, I'm sorry, Dusty 48. We did have a glitch. I'll tell you what. I'll just explain it now. The ship to Canada is so expensive that in order to ship it and not lose tens and $20s each time I shipped, I had to ship without tracking, which meant that I can't track the books. Which when people don't get them in Canada, I end up refunding them. So that's what's been happening. We're working on it. We're going to change the way that the ordering goes through. We have a very solid system in the United States, a kind of clunky one internationally, and so we're working on that. So anyway,
I'd say we're a new press, and in the past, with Zero, we were kind of insulated from some of these supply chain things because it was we were just an imprint, part of a larger publisher, and now we are a publisher, and so we are kind of experiencing some hangups here and there, but moving on very, very quickly. And we've got more books coming, audiobooks, right, as we said. So onward and upward.
Right. Okay, let's move on. So yeah, but look, I try to be transparent, and I do want to address these things when they come up. So the topic today is free speech, the liberal subject. It's been what we've been talking about for a while. And
dear watchers, it is the lighthouse toward the Sublation ship is heading. What kind of project do we have if we don't have a project for freedom? What are we fighting for? So yeah, that's what we're talking about today. And Doug, I want you to educate me. I want you to educate me about why it's not all a nothing burger. Because I feel like I have been insufficiently attendant to your deep, deep passion. And I've gone off and done my own thing, right? I wrote an article for Unheard this week on the 150th anniversary of the death of John Stuart Mill, which we're going to talk about a little bit as well. So, but I will allow Doug his space to.
Okay, well, now tell me, now what have you heard? I mean, you're talking about the disinformation war, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
the Twitter files is one way to refer to it, but it's not just about Twitter, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not the only reporting going on. But what have you heard that makes you think it might be a nothing burger?
Oh
Ashley?
no, I mean this is just what people say, and every time someone says that online, I'm like, oh, I should probably pay attention to this.
Right. Well, okay. So here's the situation. Uh, there's been a creeping acceptance of the term disinformation or misinformation into the political discourse. I don't think many people have been paying attention to it, or that close of attention. But in the background, since around 2017, the security state has been expanding its reach and its power. In 2017, the Department of Homeland Security declared all of the United States' electoral infrastructure to be within its jurisdiction. And when they did that, when that was done, that meant not only, the voting booths and the polling places and, that kind of thing, but it also included all of the information infrastructure. That means the major media and social media and the internet was now under the jurisdiction of Department of Homeland Security. So since then, we have seen these organizations pop up and uh, uh, projects being put together to allow for the enforcement of the Department of Homeland Security's efforts to control and protect the electoral process and really the information system overall. And so that is the story. The story is the creation of a security state apparatus to control the news and information in the United States. And then of course that would also mean around the world as well, because they would be censoring people from all over the world. And that is not just happening here. In Sweden, there's a new organization founded last year called the Psychological Defense Agency, which is primary task is to stop misinformation from spreading in Sweden. So are you
I muted myself, but I was going to say its primary task is to be just as dystopian as it sounds.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. And the EU has tackled the problem of disinformation. And I think that when you look at the documents out of the EU on disinformation, they're particularly revealing, because what they say is that they do not want to trample upon the sovereignty of the member nations. Um, so when they're talking about disinformation, they're not talking about anything that would be already covered by existing law. So what that means is, if it's libel or if it's a threat or if it's obscene in the United States, none of that would count as disinformation. Um, which means that these efforts are always targeting, at least in the EU, and I think in the United States as well, they're always targeting legally protected speech. This is an encroachment on everyone's basic civil liberties, and all of that sounds kind of abstract, but it has a real effect. I mean, one of the things that can come out of it is, well, in the current U.S. election cycle, the sitting president has two challengers from within his own party, but due to the way in which the major media has kind of institutionalized a relationship with the security state, and I think it's not much of a stretch to say that the security state, as it is right now, is an arm of kind of the Democratic Party and the neoconservative Republican faction. They are able to limit the amount of exposure these challengers to Biden are given in the major media. And they'll also be able to censor, say, Robert Kennedy Jr., based on his beliefs around vaccines. So that has a limiting effect on our, democratic process. And that's just, on the surface. If you want to talk about organizing for a deeper, more radical political change, organizing a real socialist party. To do that, if that were to start to happen, there's just no question that whoever was trying to organize that, whatever institution might come up or party might be formed, would certainly be censored by the existing security apparatus. And in a sense, it already is being censored. That we had some black radicals arrested as being Russian disinformation agents recently in the United States, and their crime was spreading Russian propaganda. So yeah, this is why it's a serious topic, and why people should pay attention to not just the Twitter files, but also, if they have the time, look up all these NGOs and all these governmental agencies and see what they say directly about themselves and how they describe themselves in public. But I wanted to turn it over to you and say, and thank you, by the way, for giving me a chance to rant about something I'm already obsessed upon, and kind of getting out of my fumbling at the beginning.
I want to actually ask you a question, because what people always respond is that states always do this. Come on, we all read Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent. How is this any different from what always goes on? Don't states, aren't there these filters? And more than that, doesn't capitalism exert an influence? It's not like our media is ever really being or going to be unbiased. What do you say to that?
Well, I think Chomsky's propaganda model in the in Manufacturing Consent, and he writes about elsewhere as well, is a very useful way to think about the major media, and the way in which corporate power has influenced our understanding of the news and our understanding of our politics. However, the book was written in 1989, I think, or 88, and it was speaking about what was going on at that moment in history, and it wasn't occurring at the same moment that these efforts to control the discourse were so blatant and obvious. I mean, the assumption is that they needed to expose how the free market corporate neoliberal system also can manufacture consent and have a distorting effect on the news that is at least within the same ballpark as an authoritarian state would have, in order to first of all inform the American public and the left of the necessity to look beyond the mainstream and to think more critically, and also to justify the need for political change to create conditions of freedom. But now we're in a situation where the very idea of free expression doesn't have as much currency as it did in 1988, and the state is much more directly intervening in our political discourse. It's not as though the corporate interests and the state interest are completely opposed, or that you don't still want to think about the propaganda model that Chomsky wrote about, but it does need to be updated to explain what happens when corporations no longer are competing with each other for advertising revenue or viewers in the same way, but are relying upon a kind of cooperative model of monopoly power combined with state intervention. And I don't know to the extent to which the state is actually propping up big media conglomerates like, say, NBC. I should look into that, but I do know that there is a new sensibility amongst most of the media class, and that sensibility is one where they think of themselves not as competing with each other to cover the news, but working together to propagate the right narratives that are coming out of these nonprofit groups and NGOs and really out of the security state. So
so there are a few kind of nefarious things that are going on. So Chomsky talked about like subtle filters, and I always had trouble teaching the propaganda model because I would always get essays back from students that was like the corporations say, no, you can't say this, no, you can't say that, or the state literally says, this is what you're going to say. And I was like, no, there's subtle filters. Like there's through flack and through subtle pressures in terms of your advertisers. You're a little bit careful about saying things, and if you say the wrong thing, you're gonna get blacklisted. It's a very subtle kind of system. This is not subtle. This is like a direct kind of attempt to censor, to stipulate the sorts of things that can be said, and even to say, even though something is the truth, we must be careful about saying it because of its potentially detrimental effect. So it goes much further than the more sort of subtle filtering that might have been the subject of critical analyses in the past. The other thing that's happening too is that you mentioned there's a free speech doesn't have as much currency anymore. There's not as much pushback when this happens. And I think that's really, really important because, I mean, it was just I remember like listening to NoFX in the early 2000s, and it was like, now I'm for all of these things because I read a little bit of Noam Chomsky. It was like so obvious that once you saw what was happening, you would be up in arms. You'd be like, no, I don't want the information that comes to me to be filtered by, some margarine company. I want to fight for the truth. I want, alternative media, this sort of thing. And now it's like something shifted where we can't imagine that the masses can handle the truth. We are in agreement. Those who would normally have stood up against these sorts of things are very much in agreement. And they're saying, well, yeah, because, once people get this malinformation, they're going to, they're like automatons and they can't control their behavior and they're going to make bad decisions. And there's just absolutely no faith. Because if you're going to have free speech, you have to have belief in a subject that can handle hearing things. That you have to have a lot of faith in the public sphere to be able to debate things and come to some kind of solution. Not always the correct one, but for the most part, the masses have some wisdom. We don't believe that, not in the slightest anymore. And also, I think a lot of the rhetoric that a lot of these movements policy trends to put down free speech have been the rhetoric has wrapped it up around like protecting the vulnerable, children's rights, or like, harm to children by omission. So like not censoring the internet harms children, this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And well, the left having zero foundation to stand on anymore in terms of principles has found itself largely characterized by fights for the vulnerable. And so anytime something claims to be for the vulnerable, we're like, well, this is a left-wing issue. Tra-la-la-la-la, no need to think anymore. And that's kind of where we are now.
Yeah, before we started, I asked if you would be all right with me showing a clip from this hearing, and maybe we can talk about the Republicans afterwards, but where there was a hearing on the weaponization of the federal government. The Republicans have been calling these hearings. They had brought in Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberg in one of these hearings. This one has an attorney general and some representative from Stanford. Stanford is the university which runs a lot of the programs that are also then shuttled off into other NGOs. So like Stanford's Internet Observatory is connected to the Election Integrity Project, and with CISA, which is not CISA. Sorry, I made them. It is connected to CISA, which is a Department of Homeland Security agency, but also CIS, the CyberNet, and the Cyber Internet Security or something like that. Anyway, so these different organizations are coming through and connected to Stanford. So that was one of the witnesses, and the other one was an attorney general from, I think, Missouri. In any case, I wanted to show a congresswoman explaining why it was important to basically protect the public from misinformation. And let's see if I can get that on the screen here. Here we go.
Liking, commenting, reposting.
Here it is.
What his message
was to social media platforms when it came to COVID-19 disinformation. He replied, quote, "They're killing people," end quote. I know one of our missing witnesses referenced that quote earlier, but I can't ask him about those questions because he's been excused. Now, if you look at the chart behind me, this represents the consequences of vaccine science denialism. The arrow points to May 2021. The vaccine became widely available in the United States. The deaths to the right of the arrow represent the continued wrath of COVID on our country, mostly among unvaccinated people in Texas and the southern US. And as you can see, 200,000 lives could have been saved. That's how many people were killed. Now, we used the same formula. That means that 15,000 lives could have been saved in Chairman Jordan's state of Ohio, or 5,000 lives could have been saved in Chairman Johnson's state of Louisiana. That's a lot of people. Many communities across the United States have been utterly devastated by COVID. Y'all know I represent parts of Houston, a big city, but I was born and raised in a small Texas rural community. In Duval County, where I was born, 1 out of 151 people died of COVID. In a similar community like Lamb County, Texas, nearly 1 out of every 100 people was killed by COVID. This death rate was one of the highest in the country and 3 times that of the nation as a whole. In fact, across the country, rural America's death rate has been nearly 40% higher than that of those in cities. This is tragically sad, and I believe it's vaccine denialism that costs these American deaths. Only 56% of rural residents are fully vaccinated versus 67% of their urban counterparts. In my home state of Texas, it's estimated that 2,000 lives could have been saved if we had reached the vaccination levels of places like Vermont or Connecticut. Mr. Sauer, you signed the Missouri v. Biden's plaintiff's motion for preliminary injunction. That motion claims that Biden's statement that the social media companies are, quote, killing people by letting vaccine disinformation spread was somehow illegal censorship. I frankly cannot disagree with you more strongly, but I have a simple fact question for you today. Mr. Sauer, for you, do you agree that COVID vaccine saves lives? Just a yes or no, please. Mr. Sauer, I asked for a yes or no. Yes, 2 simple words, yes or no. So
His
you're Harvard
microphone's
trained,
off.
you pretend to be an expert here, and you cannot answer the simple question of whether or not you agree that COVID vaccine saves lives.
You put, gentlemen, Mr. Sauer, can you put
Mr.
you hit the
Sublation, will
microphone
you
there?
answer my question since it looks like our Harvard colleague over there cannot?
Yes, I believe vaccines save lives.
Thank you. Mr. Sauer, you also signed the Missouri versus Biden Second Amendment complaint, which criticized Twitter for removing content suggesting that, quote, face masks do not work to reduce transmission or to protect against COVID-19. Well, as a journalist in Texas did a lot of the work that apparently you haven't, and compiled 49 studies, all showing that masks effectively reduce the rate of COVID transmission. Mr. Sauer, yes or no again? Do you agree that face masks stop the transmission of COVID?
I refer you to the
Sir, a yes or no question?
again, Congresswoman, I
Yes
refer
or
you,
no question, sir?
I refer
It
you,
is my time. I want a yes or no. If that's too hard for you, then I'll just move on. So I'll ask you, Mr. Zigman, do you agree that face masks stop the transmission of COVID?
My understanding is the scientific evidence is yes, it does.
Right. So, Mr. Sauer, your motion for preliminary injunction claims that even U.S. Department of Health and Human Services efforts to gather information about how widespread COVID-19 disinformation could somehow be censorship. Knowing how the American people are being lied to is not censorship, but I guess you might be scared what the data will show. Mr. Sauer, again, a yes or no. Do you believe that public health experts need data about the impact of disinformation in order to stop people in places like rural Texas from dying from this pandemic?
federal officials should not be demanding data about
Sir,
people's
could you
political
just
and
answer
social
yes or
opinions
no?
expressed on social
Yes or
media.
no, please.
I reiterate what I say. Under the
You're
First
refusing
Amendment,
to answer my question.
under the First Amendment,
You're
federal
refusing
officials
to
should not
answer.
be
Thank you,
demanding
Mr.
that.
Sullivan. Sigelman, do you agree that data on disinformation is necessary to help stop these lies from spreading?
Yes.
Thank you. You're an actual expert on disinformation.
Ladies,
All right. So that was long, but I thought it was worth showing because there was the argument. There is the argument, I think, for censorship right now. I mean, it's not always about COVID. It's not always about masking or vaccine hesitancy, but it's always about protecting the public. Sorry, someone says this clip is cruel and unusual punishment. Sorry, I'm sorry. It's just I think it is important because that is the argument. That is the argument. The argument is, look, disinformation can lead to bad consequences. The other argument they make is disinformation about the election led to January 6th, and people died. So because of that, there needed to be control of the discourse so that people wouldn't get the wrong impression that the election had been stolen, right? So we needed to censor people online and censor the media in order that the public wouldn't get the wrong idea and wouldn't question the results of that election.
Oh my gosh.
Now, Mill has a harm principle, which is that, you can censor speech if it causes harm, but the definition of harm is incredibly narrow. You have to be immediately calling for violence, which is enacted, like saying, go burn down that house. That should be stopped. But anyhow, what did you think of that clip other than that it was long?
Oh no, I thought it was great. It was really illustrative, and so frustrating, And like people watching that are like, oh, great rhetoric, that's great. How skilled. When we all know that it's a way of getting this person to say things that are in agreement with her, in spite of all of the other complications around this particular issue. So what I find so interesting about this is that in some ways, there's nothing new about this, right? There's this is how governments always try to make you, not just governments, interested parties, advocacy groups, lobby groups, ministers, people who want you to go to war, people who want you to give to charity, people who want you to do something, have found it very successful to say, people are dying. Aren't you a good person? What good person would allow people to die? Do you want people to die? Do you want children to be harmed? Think of the children. Won't someone think of the children? This is very, very successful. And this is what they're doing.
Right.
And so there's nothing new about that. On the other hand, what is new about it is that they make it personally problematic or risky, therefore, to argue against something. And again, when the public square or the field of public discourse was much more narrow, before the age of social media, this was always the case, right? So you frame claims in this way. Do you want children to die, minister? So that it becomes politically problematic for someone in power to oppose a particular agenda. Right. So this is what people do. This is like basic kind of claims making. This is my area of research, so sociology of social problems. This is basic rhetoric of trying to get people on side. When you believe that something is problematic and you are campaigning to have something done about it, and also for the problem to be interpreted the way that you want it to be interpreted, you have every incentive to frame that issue as having a positive valence, as it being just a no-brainer. Of course, this is a problem. Of course, you should adopt my solutions. And what you don't want is to invite anyone to oppose it. And so there are all sorts of rhetorical kind of strategies that people use to do that. And one of them is, again, harm to innocence. Because if you then oppose it, you want to harm innocence. Right? Or people dying. So if you want to oppose that, you want people to die. And so this becomes like the frame that people will exploit to get policymakers to not organize against something and to affirm it and to institutionalize, to put that what those people want into policy. But what's happened now is that more and more people are part of the public discourse because we have social media. You have interactions between policymakers and everyday people. You have interactions between lots of people. So our social media squares have become our sort of public square. Unfortunately, it is a public square that operates in a private space. So what happens is it's now personally risky for you to make these arguments, for you to question something in policy. It becomes, of course, this is like cancel culture and all that sort of thing. So if you question a particular agenda, it's not just you might not get voted in again, you might lose your job, right? You might get ostracized. It becomes very, very difficult. You know, I question things sometimes on social media, and if I really get too close to the bone, people will start to at the university. That's what they try to do, and what they're doing is they're trying to make it personally risky. Especially like when I've stood up against the whole outlawing forms of corporal punishment in the home, people have tried to make that personally risky for me. They have tried to make threats against my children. To say that they're going to call social services on my children, that I shouldn't be allowed to be a parent. And they have also tried to, even my own colleagues have tried to get me in trouble with the university anonymously. And people have added the university, but because it is framed as harm to children. And American culture and our Western culture generally has a very, obviously we have a very strong idea that children are wholly innocent, wholly angelic, and, harbingers of they hold the truth, they are the future, all these sorts of things. And we get very squeamish around this idea of any kind of negative feelings in childhood, any kind of discipline. Any kind of discipline increasingly is becoming a difficult thing to argue against. But anyways, so they will try to make that personally. So if something is framed as just wholly good, right? It's not just enough to frame it that way. It's not enough for a policymaker to be risking something if they support it. It's now risky to everyday people in the public square. And this, I think, is an interesting turn that we have taken. And we're seeing some of the fruition of it in terms of, going to war and making it difficult and like certain justifications of removal of civic freedoms, removal of freedom in our everyday life, removal of free speech, and so on. And it becomes very, very difficult now for everyone to stand up to it. And it becomes very unpopular. And I know, Doug, you have also experienced this, just for talking about it, because people were so on side. As I said, the left now has lost its foundations and finds it very difficult to make principled arguments in favor of freedom. They were happy about this because they're like, well, I am in favor of not harming people. Capitalism is in favor of harming people. Capitalists like freedom. Therefore, I don't like freedom. Because we now, at a very sort of basic, stupid level, people will just sort of negate what they think capitalism proposes, which is why we called our company and our project here Sublation, because we are not about simply opposing things, we're about sublating. And so people are just like, oh, well, no, capitalism wants to harm people and they want us all to work during COVID. And you idiots, you were trying to spread this information that's going to harm people, and people are harmed. I can think of no alternative arguments against harm. In fact, you should be shut up for making these arguments. And well, nobody told you. People were like,
Yep. You're breaking up a little bit, Ashley, but I would just point out that, in the past, the concern about cancel culture was one where, it was hard to translate that into something political. All we were really doing was trying to instill a love of free expression and fair play into the left milieu that we were part of. That was what that was about. It was like we couldn't do much about how people behaved on social media if they wanted to, pile up on someone for saying the wrong thing and behave like, jackals or like the police. There wasn't a lot to do about it. All we could say is, let's not, as the left, embrace this approach to understanding speech, and let's not target individuals for punishment based on having the wrong opinions. Now, however, this has gone from being a social phenomenon on Twitter, where people pile on someone or try to cancel them, to now being something that the security state has weaponized and can use to get rid of dissidents and of all types. And so now, rather than your comments being unpopular and causing a groups of people to maybe write to your university to see if they can get you fired, what can happen, what probably will start to happen and may have already started to happen, is that you can simply be labeled as a disinformation agent and removed from your post on that basis, or certainly removed from the internet on that basis. That's what we're facing now. And
I'm just going to preempt the comments that are going to be underneath this video. Oh no, you're not going to be on the internet. We'll go outside and like enjoy the sunshine. Thanks, Mr. FBI agent. I enjoy your input. Carry on, Doug.
Yeah. I mean, look, obviously the internet is vitally important in today's world. If you are someone who wants to have your ideas read or seen, if you do not have access to the internet, then you will not have anywhere near the reach as you
Clarify,
would
we mean
otherwise.
social media, any kind of public stage.
May not be just social media. You could have your ability to get paid by an audience removed. You could have, if you created an app of your own to try to communicate with people, like set up your own platform, that can be removed. You can be barred from using the internet to communicate with others or to make an income as well. That these things happen. So someone's saying, getting Douglas Lain.
Having a normal one. Twitter isn't real. I touch grass. Message sent by a test. I was going to say something, but go ahead. You were going to read a comment.
Oh no, it's all right. Someone says I need to get Zumba lessons for his birthday.
Oh yeah, I remember what I was going to say. It's that like people who agree implicitly will make all these excuses, and this is what was happening, where people would make excuses like, oh, all these leftists suddenly become like Ayn Rand, and they're like, oh, but it's a company, they can do whatever they want, right? Okay, so then let them put out poison lunch meat and see what you think. Anyway, it's they're free to do, they can decide, they can curate, and so on. And then it turns against them, and they're like, free speech, it's the Nazis, it's fascism, right? I just want you to think like you don't care because the people that are being targeted are people you don't like. Right. And you should question that. First of all, why are you in bed with the FBI on these sorts of things?
Right,
Although, you never know. You can have a common enemy and have different causes. Okay, let's put that down. That's fine. But also, well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, given the level of entwinement between the security state and these tech companies, it is no longer accurate to say they're private companies acting, as is their right within in a free society, and protected by the Constitution and so forth. In fact, it's been fairly thoroughly documented, and continuing more information comes in all the time that the major media, including the tech companies, are under the direction of the security state and the federal government in the United States. And really, this is happening more and more around the world, that the states are partnering up with and entwining themselves into big tech and media. So when, for instance, ABC News decides not to run a portion of their interview with Robert Kennedy Jr., that should be considered state censorship, as far as I'm concerned, given the degree to which we know these media people are meeting with government officials to decide what is disinformation and what isn't on a regular basis. So,
but I want to just say, if people are honest with themselves and you want to test yourself about whether or not you don't care because it's people you don't care about, or if it's the principle, just picture if it was like trans activists or something that are getting barred from internet usage, or, people, some issue that you care about, and all of a sudden people are getting dragged to court. Now, do you feel it's a problem? Or are you still going to say it's okay, they can do what they want?
I mean, that absolutely could happen, and does happen. And in the other thing is, in the different parts of the United States, different realms of censorship arise based on who's in power. So it's
Yes,
absolutely the
exactly.
case that, in the United States, you have government officials trying to put limits on expression around what you can wear in public, or to degree to which you can advocate for gender affirming care,
Yes.
and so on. And so this is not a censorship in one direction.
Yeah,
It
and this
happens
is
to
the
be
thing.
go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, well, I was just going to say, attacking people with censorship, using censorship as a weapon is obviously a double-edged sword, right? Because first of all, it's going to be used against you. But here's the thing. Go back to like basic value conflict theory in sociology. When you have an issue that's extremely controversial, right? Both sides can't seem to agree. You get this deadlock. So abortion, for instance, is a famous position issue. Neither side will budge, it seems. And so there's this deadlock. And so how people have tried to resolve the deadlock is by trying to censor the other side, by trying to crush the other side. And if you can't have any bargaining, then this is what happens. Whoever gets into power, if there's no, and like how we managed to get anywhere with the abortion issue was through bargaining, was through consensus. People wanted abortion up to birth, and it's not because people are like aborting 9-month-old infants. It's because if you have some sort of arbitrary cutoff, inevitably it causes problems. That was the argument. But they managed to get something by having some kind of consensus. However, Roe v. Wade was the result of like packing out the important positions with sympathetic parties. But anyways, still generally in the UK and so on, there was a lot of progress made because people made concessions. Now it's like no concession, no bargaining, nothing. This is the way it is. And they attacked and hounded people. I'm just saying just not abortion people. I'm saying like generally activists on these really contentious issues attacked and hounded people, made it personally problematic and risky to make arguments against their campaigns. And what happened? People didn't just shut up. They got mad. And when they got into power, they crushed the other side. This is what happened. You have to understand a certain amount of consensus, a certain amount of bargaining is an important part of living, even in a capitalist, democratic society, making it kind of livable. When we have been for too long trying to just smash each other, we've got to talk to each other and have some bargaining. We're going down this path now, and we haven't figured it out that you're gonna have to talk to. We have to live together for a little bit anyway. Like we have to live. We have to try to convince each other of our arguments. Otherwise, this is what happens. We've rolled back in a lot of places. There was a tacit consensus 10, 15 years ago that if somebody passed as the opposite gender, they passed and they got most of the rights and so on. That was just like not all of them. Obviously, there was still a ways to go, but people kind of respected them and recognized them as their gender. Now people are starting to say, no, on principle, even if you pass as the opposite sex or opposite gender, I am going to still call you this thing. That is going backward. We've gone backward. And now we're starting to get laws and so on. We're starting to get people who come into power. They're just they're making arguments about taking children away from gender affirming parents and from non-gender. We're like just smashing each other. And this is what happens when you try to shut down the other side instead of having any kind of consensus or bargaining.
Right. I wanted to. Someone accused me earlier of wondered when I was going to pull a Lenny Bruce and just start reading the Twitter files aloud. And I'm not going to do that, but I might read my own tweets in a minute. But I wanted to talk about Karl Marx and remind everyone and remind myself that free speech was at the center of his politics. And that is, he is considered by many on the right to be this kind of absolutist statist authoritarian. But he absolutely was at the beginning of his political career a rabid free speech advocate, and he had a good reason for just taking that position. One of which was that he felt that the state authorities were never going to transform society in the way that it needed to be transformed, and that it was only the working classes taking power that would manage to create conditions where we could get out from under a class society and all the contradictions within capitalism, which meant expanding the right to speak and be heard into civil society, into everyday life. But he also said that those who would censor are no freer from the errors produced by the total conditions of possibility in society than anyone else. So if when you turn to censorship, you're always going to be censoring the truth along the way. No one has a monopoly on truth. There is no power that is greater than the mass of society itself. So you just, if you care about the truth, you have to be an advocate for free speech. You have to try to extend the right to be heard to as many people as you can, and that includes the right to be heard and be in error, and be say very wrong-headed things like the earth is flat, or what have you. But I mean, they want to make it so that if you claim that an election was rigged, that's disinformation and you need to be shut down. They
I
want
couldn't
to limit.
possibly go wrong anyway. I can't think of anything.
No, right.
How weird.
Right. So, yeah, I've put out feelers to see if I can go on to the majority report and have my Mehdi Hassan moment, where I get completely pulverized by a skilled debater. This is my plan. This is how I want to go out. This is the hill I'm going to die on. But I'm hoping that Sam Cedar will say yes and have me on, because I'd like to talk to them about this topic. But you wrote this article about Mill, and we've been sort of talking around it. What do you think it is from Mill that people need to embrace or even sublate and transcend in their politics today, Ashley?
Well, it's interesting because if you read Mill, he was like a lot of people during his time in thinking that socialism appeared. It seemed like it was, this was the next thing. Like if you look at which Mill thought was a bad thing, by the way. He was hesitant to support the Chartists, for instance, and their idea of universal manhood suffrage or suffrage for working men, even because it would mean that the vast majority of society would have a vote, and this could lead to the tyranny of the majority. So there's lots in Mill that obviously, we don't want to support, but there was this kind of sense where he felt it was kind of inevitable, like Tocqueville before him, who was like, well, look, they've got rid of all the old privileges. Tocqueville says this. They got rid of all the old privileges, but don't you think they're going to agitate for the last one that still remains? Property, like it's the last one. It's obviously going to go next. Now they thought this was a bad thing, obviously, but it seemed more or less inevitable. And if you read, or at least that people were going to agitate in this direction, if you read Mill, he has a lot of recognition for class struggle and the fact that what people will support comes from their class position. And so there's, an amazing amount. And of course, he's like sort of supporting the welfare state and women's rights and all these kinds of ideas that kind of get lost in Mill is just a straightforward kind of libertarian supporter. But what's interesting is I was reading August Nimt's. Oh, before I go into August Nimt's, I was going to say about your point on Marx and free speech. Now, we all know that he wrote in 1842 or 1843, the truly radical cure for censorship would be its abolition. But also he passionately defended freedom of the press. Really passionately. He quotes Goethe, and he's like, he likened it to a thing of beauty, without which my nature can have no full, satisfied, complete existence. So he wrote really passionately about freedom of the press. He felt this need for freedom in his bones. But anyways, I was reading August Nimt's Marxism versus Liberalism, and he makes the case that in many ways, across sort of liberal thinkers, Marx is much more liberal. like Tocqueville sees the abolition of private property is just inevitable because they've abolished all the old privileges, as I said. And if you look at Mill versus Marx on the Civil War, Mill doesn't write anything on the American Civil War. Mill doesn't write anything about it until he's like about to go on holiday, or he writes very little about it until he's about to go on holiday. And someone's like, hey, his stepdaughter's like, hey, you should really write about this. And he's like, oh. He like has to be kind of, and he is in agreement with Marx in almost every way, except that, so he thinks that this is a war about slavery. He thinks that it's never gonna, the slave holders are never gonna stop because they need to spread slavery into other states for it to survive, or other areas for it to survive. And it eats up liberty everywhere it goes. Marx and Mill said basically the same thing. But Mill thought that what should we do about this? Well, men of letters, the more well-known, the better, should put themselves forward. Whereas Marx thinks it's the working people, and he's agitating and has like the sort of like Marx Party that are doing his dirty work in the United States. And in the end, it was from the middle and working classes that made the biggest difference. And obviously, Lincoln sort of carved up his sleeve, which was mobilization of the former slaves, mobilization of the slaves. I'm not an expert in this, and I'm sure my lack of specificity in language is going to get me. But anyways, I recommend that people read this particular book, because the point that he makes is that, first of all, Marx is right that it was the people of the lower orders that ultimately proved the most decisive, not the great men of letters that did things. And then the second thing was when it came to what to do about the former slave owners and what to do about the South, do we allow them to rule again, knowing that we just fought this huge battle to emancipate the slaves, and now you're going to let them kind of rule over the slaves? We can't obviously have that. Mill kind of muses about the necessity of a military dictatorship lasting 2 generations in order to get the stain out of the hearts of the privileged, which sounds like what people attribute to Marxists today. Now, here's the thing. Mill is saying that's the direction that policy seems to be going, but he has more faith in the American people than that. And he thinks that suffrage for the former slaves will work to kind of dampen down these elements and ensure a fight for equality, or some kind of semblance of equality. But August Nimps made a mistake in that book, I have to say, where he says that Mill thinks that they should actually have a military dictatorship. He doesn't appear to say that. And I wrote an article for Unheard, and here's why you should always go to the original sources, my friends, because I always go to the original sources, and I had to file, and I was running out of time. And the first draft of that, I filed without checking the original source. And it kept me up at night. And I went, and I literally 1 o'clock in the morning, I jumped out of bed. And I need to find this, because I can't imagine Mill actually literally defending a military dictatorship. And also the fact that no one has ever mentioned this letter struck me as odd. So, because it's quite momentous that this person who writes on liberty thinks that there should be a 2-generation military dictatorship. Anyway, so I looked it up, and no, Mill is just saying without suffrage, you would need to have a military dictatorship that would last 2 generations. But he does say, like, well, we can't just give back. And he's trying to figure out, like, well, we can get around legality and so on, because essentially this is a defeated state, and in war, all bets are off. So he is making excuses for holding back freedoms. And this is the thing that liberals often did. And a better example is Tocqueville and many other liberals. And of course, the whole direction that history went, which was when the proverbial poop hit the fan, all bets were off and freedoms were rescinded.
Yeah.
And Marx, on the other hand, immediately agitates for more freedom.
That's why Marx doesn't believe that a right protected by that is established by and protected by state power will ever be secure enough to provide free speech to civil society. That he does not oppose free speech. He thinks that the rights basis for it is not adequate. And
Exactly.
and he says, whenever there's a threat to the security of the state, that right will be tossed into the garbage bin. It will be pushed aside. The other thing I want to say about this point you make about it's being the working class and the middle classes and the everyday people, the masses, that really are decisive in making positive change and eliminating slavery. That's something we should keep in mind when we wonder about and worry about social media. Like the over the last 20 years, the bloom has gone off of the California ideology, right? Oh, the internet will save us. Everyone will get a chance to express themselves. We'll form new basis of politics. Will be everything will be leveled, and people will spontaneously organize themselves together with the help of the machine. And the problem with the California ideology was not its vision of mass participation and mass expression. The problem with California ideology was not that it was too confident in the character of the everyday person, and that in fact, really, these people needed to be treated by the Psychological Defense Agency or something like that, right? No, the problem with the California ideology is it was naive about the power of capital and the tendency for capital, even financial capital or media companies, to monopolize, and the way in which the capital was a more powerful system than even the internet. So you could impose its needs on to what was supposed to be a very flat kind of decentralized network of sharing computers. So when we struggle against the monopolization of the internet, when we struggle against the California ideology, we shouldn't struggle against the best aspects of it. We shouldn't say, "Oh yeah, we don't want everyone to have their voice be heard. We don't want the massive noise of social media and Twitter." We should say, "No, the problem with social media is that the algorithms are programmed by not only these big corporate powers but also by the state, and the problem is that it's not level enough, and we need to get back to things like net neutrality." But and that's just mild reformism that I'm pushing here. But
no, but Doug, the commenters say that you think the state's just going to wither away like tomorrow. So
when who said that?
oh, there's a comment. Hey, Doug, the state will wither away, Lain. Someone said. Yeah. Does anyone think that the state will wither away? Anyone except maybe the people that Lenin were accusing of this, like in 1907, was it? Think that the state will wither away before any kind of revolution?
Well, no, I mean, the idea is not that the state will wither away on its own accord just because of capitalist's own internal development. The idea is that if the proletariat were to organize as a socialist party and take control of and transform the means of production and take hold of the administrative state, that the need for the administrative state would diminish, and the state would wither away because of the freedom that would be expressed through production. The free proletariat.
Do you mean like in a far future communism? When
I don't know. I wouldn't be so pessimistic as to put it into the in 10,000 years in the future or anything, but I would say that anything that could arise after a socialist party organized the international working class to take power over the means of production and take political power would theoretically set up conditions for the state to wither away. But to say that the state will wither away is not to say, oh yeah, we can just rely on some evolutionary process of politics and society to watch, and look, neoliberalism already shows the state's withering away. It doesn't. The state is as powerful as ever under neoliberalism. No, what the point of that is to say the state is not the institution of liberation for the proletariat. The state, the gaining state power is not the horizon of possibility when it comes to creating socialism. So, in fact, my concern about the state intruding into our everyday lives and trying to control our discourse is completely in line with my ultra leftist, quasi-anarchist vision of what socialism arising would be like.
Well, actually, do you know, me and Spencer Leonard kind of clarified some of these questions in a interview that will be released soon.
Sometime soon. I have an interview with Chris Catrone and Adrian Johnston where they are arguing about they're politely debating the question of Lacan, the Lacanian left, and as opposed to a more Freudio-Marxist kind of Frankfurt School approach to understanding these questions. That's coming up soon. That just was recorded the other day. I have an interview with Johannes, who's a socialist in Sweden, who's looking back over the last 20 years of his activism and trying to figure out what went wrong. When we talk for a little while, I have an interview with Deep State Cuba on the topic of whether or not we need to have, eventually we agree more than we disagree, but I just thought I'd bring Deep State Cuba on and abuse him for a couple of hours because his name is Deep State Cuba, but he's actually a good guy.
Oh, and then of course I've got Joel Kotkin and Fabio Vighi that I'm talking to tomorrow to finish out my exploration of neo-feudalism. And I was in London on Thursday, and I met Alan Freeman in person and Radhika Desai, and they were so amazing. And I was like, "Oh, please don't Google me; you'll hate me." They're just so wonderful. It's such amazing to talk. Alan Freeman, by the way, and Andrew Kleinman have a series of papers looking at the falling rate of profit and Henrik Grossman that were just absolutely formative to my whole thinking about things. And I talk about how the Frankfurt School suppressed economics and suppressed Grossman. That's Alan Freeman's paper does that. I think it's a 2007 paper. It's very, very good. That's why I really like Alan Freeman for those, not just that, but for that series of paper. So I'm going to be talking to them soon as well. So yeah, stay tuned. And in the parent room, I wanted to talk about Marx's view of democracy.
Well, that's great. We should definitely do that. I also want to remind everyone, this is year one for Sublation Magazine. Alfie Baun is the editor there. He's been doing a great job. We've got articles right now on ChatGPT. The one's called ChatGPT is human or non-human. We got one from Mike Watson saying the art world needs to look at Marxist economics, not ethics. And I have been recording each article as quickly as I can as they get published and releasing them on Patreon. So if you sign up at the audio article, the audio version of Sublation Magazine through Patreon, you'll get to hear me read aloud a few times a week, like 2-3 times a week. I'm the narrator of Todd McGowan's book, Enjoyment Right and Left, which should be coming out.
Sweet
tomorrow.
Voice being directly into your brain.
Yeah. You can listen to me struggle not to lisp. Listen, if you enjoyed this conversation, join us in the parent room on Patreon. I'll put a link to it. We'll start that up in about 20 minutes. Also, again, at the start, Dusty48 said he'd been waiting a while. He's in Israel for his book to arrive. Most of the books have been arriving, especially in the United States. There's been no trouble, but Dusty, I will reach out to you later today. If you've been emailing me through the Sublation Magazine or the Sublation Media email address, I've been slow to get back to people on that. I've been caught up in so many other things, but I will go through those emails today after I finish editing the audiobook for Todd McGowan, and you'll get your money back. So, join us over in the Patreon, and we look forward to seeing you there. And your support makes all the difference. We're ready for year 2. We're ready to go. Alfie's doing a great job. Go read Sublation Magazine. And with that, I'm gonna hit the button for the out. Here we go.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around